The debt was 3 years overdue, and the man sent to collect it was the Alpha King himself. Isabel heard the horses first. 4 of them, she thought, though the sound carried strangely through the old timber walls of her stepfather's house at the edge of the market district, a house that had once belonged to a guild administrator, and now belonged to a man who had spent the intervening 20 years making it smaller. She was at the writing desk in the hall when the knock came, not the soft knock of a tradesman or the hesitant rap of someone who expected to be turned away, but the deliberate, unhurried strike of someone who had never, in their entire life, considered the possibility of not being answered. She went to the door because there was no one else. Her mother had been unwell for 6 weeks, confined to the upper room where the air came through the southern shutter and the light lasted a little longer. Her stepfather, Coltrane, had been absent for 11 days, 3 days longer than he had told her, and she suspected approximately as long as it had taken his creditors to learn that he was gone. The house had been very quiet. The box had been in her care for all of that quiet. It sat on the writing desk behind her now, the size of a travelling case, made of dark iron fitted over older wood. The clasp was a wolf devouring its own tail. Not decorative, not heraldic, just a mechanism, though it was the kind of mechanism that made locksmiths look at it and then look away. The box had been in the house for 4 years. Isabel had never seen it open. When she had asked Coltrane what it contained, he had told her it was collateral, then changed the subject with the particular efficiency of a man who had learned that the best way to not answer a question was to make the asker feel foolish for having raised it. She did not feel foolish now. She felt, with a clarity that had been sharpening itself all week, that the box was the reason for the horses. She opened the door. He was taller than she had expected, which was not a thought that came easily. She had heard descriptions. The court district was full of them, passed between merchants and washerwomen with the practiced confidence of people who had never been within 3 rooms of the man himself. Dark gold hair, worn loose because there was no one in his life who could ask him to do otherwise. Fair skin marked at the cheekbones and throat with the permanent windburn of someone who spent most of his life on horseback in cold air. Eyes that caught the last light of the evening. Amber gold. Unsettling in the way of something that doesn't match what the brain had already prepared. He was alone. That surprised her more than the height. Behind him, on the narrow street, 2 riders waited at a distance. The other 2 horses were his, and a second mount she did not understand, until she did. He had brought a horse for whoever he was taking with him. She had been standing in doorways most of her life. She had learned to take in what was relevant and close her face around it before anyone noticed it had been open. Her hands rested flat against her thighs. She waited. Coltrane Ashfeld, the Alpha King said. His voice was low, not raised for her benefit, the kind of voice that made you lean forward slightly before you had decided to. Is he here? It was not a question. No, she said. He has not been here for 11 days. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise. She did not think this man surprised easily, but a recalibration. He looked at her the way someone looks at a fact that has altered a calculation they were already midway through. And the box, he said. Her hands stayed flat. Inside. He was quiet for a moment. On the street behind him, one of the horses shifted and was stilled. The evening was going blue-grey around the rooftops, and there was a fire somewhere close enough that she could smell it, wood smoke and old stone, and she was aware of him, looking at her in the thorough, unhurried way of someone who had been waiting 3 years and did not consider 4 more seconds to be an inconvenience. "You know what it is," he said. "I know what it holds," she said. "I don't know what it means." That apparently was the right answer. He did not smile, but something shifted slightly in the quality of his attention, and she had been paying close enough attention to notice. "Then you'll come with it," he said. It was not a question either. His name was Gawthron. She had known that. What she had not known, what the market district's second-hand descriptions had entirely failed to convey, was the specific quality of his silence, which was not empty, but occupied. He rode ahead of her on the road to the Capitol Court complex, and said nothing for 2 hours. And in those 2 hours, she had the sensation, several times, that he was thinking rather than merely waiting, that something was working behind the stillness rather than resting in it. She carried the box across her lap, one hand steady on the clasp. She had brought the things her mother required. The medicines, the compound the physician had mixed, the instructions written in a hand she could read clearly. She had arranged for the neighbor's daughter to sit with her until she returned. She had not asked how long that would be, because she had understood, with the same cold clarity that had been accumulating all week, that she was not in a position to set terms, and asking questions she could not enforce the answers to would only demonstrate that she knew it. The court complex was grand in the way of things built to make people feel small. Polished stone floors caught torchlight and held it, stretched out under ceilings that rose into shadow. Heraldic banners, deep crimson and black, hung between carved columns, and the guards at the inner gate stood with the particular stillness of men who had been doing this for long enough that they had stopped thinking about it. Isabel had been in administrative buildings before. She had sat in clerks' offices and assessors' waiting rooms and the outer halls of modest councillors, and she had learned to appear smaller than she was, without performing it. This was different. This was scale used as architecture. She followed him through 2 corridors and a guarded antechamber, and into a room she understood, from its proportions and the document racks along one wall, was a working council chamber rather than a formal hall. There was a fire in the great hearth at the far end. There were candles on the long table. There was a woman standing to the right of the hearth who had been waiting for him, and who turned when he entered with the fluid ease of someone who had been expecting him and had arranged herself accordingly. Lady Senna Aldrath was perhaps 40, fine-boned and precise, dressed in the kind of grey that cost more than most families spent in a season. She had the particular grace of a woman who had been performing competence in rooms like this for her entire adult life, and had long since stopped distinguishing the performance from the thing itself. She looked at Isabel. Then she looked at the box. Then she looked at Gawthron. "She is not Coltrane Ashfeld," Lady Aldrath said. "Coltrane Ashfeld ran," he said. He moved to the end of the table, pulled out a chair with the ease of someone who did not think about furniture, and sat. He gestured, without ceremony, to the chair across from him. Isabel sat. She set the box on the table between them. In the firelight, the wolf clasp cast a small, hard shadow, the tail disappearing into the creature's own mouth. Lady Aldrath had come to stand at the table's edge. She did not sit. Her position, at the right shoulder of the Alpha King, standing while others sat, was the most fluent sentence Isabel had seen spoken in this room so far. "The debt," Lady Aldrath said, with the tone of a woman resuming an established position, "was Ashfeld's to settle. The terms specify his presence." "The terms," Gawthron said, "specify the box." He did not look at her. He was looking at the box. More precisely, Isabel noticed this because she noticed things. He was looking at the clasp. "She has no standing in a debt arrangement she is not party to. She carried it here, under duress, presumably, which makes her a courier, not a party." Isabel set her hands flat on the table. "May I speak?" The room went briefly still. Not dramatically. No one drew breath. But the quality of the attention in it shifted, the way a room shifts when a piece of furniture unexpectedly moves under its own power. "Yes," Gawthron said. Lady Aldrath had not said no. That was its own kind of information. "The debt," Isabel said, "was contracted on a pledge of collateral. The collateral is in this box. Coltrane Ashfeld is my stepfather. I am not party to the contract. You're correct about that. But I have been caretaker of the collateral for 4 years, and I am here now, and he is not." She looked at Gawthron. "Whatever the box contains, it is here. If you tell me what the terms require beyond that, I will tell you whether I can satisfy them." She had not planned the speech. She had worked it out somewhere between the city gate and the antechamber, the way she worked out most things, quietly, in the time available, without announcing that she was doing it. Gawthron was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Open it." Lady Aldrath made a sound that was not quite an objection. Isabel looked at the clasp. She had touched it 100 times in 4 years, adjusting it on a shelf, moving it when she needed the desk surface, wiping dust from the iron fittings. She had never tried to open it. She pressed the wolf's tail into the creature's mouth. The mechanism gave with a sound like a lock releasing, smooth and decided, and the lid lifted. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Inside the box, on a bed of old cloth, lay a seal. Not a letter seal, not a wax stamp, but an object, a disc of dark stone the size of a palm, ringed in iron, marked across its face with a pattern that Isabel had never seen before, and did not have a name for. It sat in the cloth and caught the firelight in a way that stone should not have caught firelight, a faint amber glow moving across its surface and then going still. And then, slowly, it began to glow again, not brightly. Nothing dramatic, but unmistakably, in the way of something that had been waiting for permission rather than for the right conditions. Lady Aldrath stepped back from the table. One step, controlled, but Isabel noticed it. Gawthron did not move. He was looking at the seal with the expression of a man who has just heard a number that changes every calculation he has made for the past 3 years. Then he looked up at Isabel, and whatever he saw in her face, she was keeping it as still as she could manage, made something move briefly in his own. He reached across the table, not toward the seal. He turned it over in her direction, just slightly, so she could see the back of it. There was a mark there, a bloodline marker, she understood, though she had only read about such things in the administrative records Coltrane had occasionally had her copy. It was a specific notation used by the old court compilers, not the current system, not anything that had been in active use within her lifetime. She looked at it. She looked at her own hand. There, at the inside of her right wrist, running under the cuff of her work sleeve, was a mark she had been born with and had been told her entire life was a birthmark. A discoloration, her mother had called it. Nothing. It was not nothing. It was the same notation. The archivist's name was Breveth, a small spare man with the careful movements of someone who had spent decades handling things that did not like to be rushed. He came at Gawthron's summons within the hour, carrying a leather case of documents under one arm, and looking, when he entered and saw the open box on the table, the way a man looks when something he spent years cataloguing finally proves itself. He said, "That is the Ashfeld seal." Then he said, "Or rather, it is not the Ashfeld seal. It never was. Ashfeld purchased it from a dissolved estate 15 years ago. He did not know what he had." He set his documents on the table, opened the case with the care of someone who loved his work, and produced a record. It was old. The edges had been reinforced with newer binding. He laid it flat beside the box. "The last recorded activation of the Vestari Bloodline seal," he said, "was 276 years ago, when the last Vestari heir entered the court in the reign of the king before the king, before the king, before this one." He paused. "The record uses the language of the period, but its meaning is not ambiguous." He looked at Isabel. "The seal does not glow for the person who holds it. It glows for the person it recognizes." Isabel looked at the seal. The seal continued its quiet amber pulse, the same rhythm as her own heartbeat, which she was suddenly extremely aware of. "My mother's name before she married," she said. Not a question. Not yet. Breveth consulted his record without looking up. The dissolved estate from which Coltrane Ashfeld purchased the box was registered under the family name Vestara. simplified, over 3 generations, from the original. He looked up now. Your mother's maiden name. The fire in the hearth was the only sound in the room for a moment. Lady Aldrath said, from the far side of the table, in a voice that was still smooth, but had acquired a very specific precision, "A birthmark is not a bloodline verification. The seal's response could be environmental. Temperature, the fire, the iron fittings." "It has been near fire all evening," Gawthron said. He had not taken his eyes off Isabel since Breveth had finished speaking. "It did not glow until she opened it. I would need the records independently verified before any formal standing could be—" "That will happen," he said. He said it the way he said most things, flatly finally, as though the sentence were a door he had just closed. "Tonight she stays in the court complex, her mother's address, where she is." That last was directed at Isabel. She gave it. He did not write it down. She suspected he did not need to. Lady Aldrath was looking at her now with the specific quality of attention she had not directed at her since the beginning of the evening. The full assessment, made with the visible composure of a woman who did not let assessments show. Isabel met it. She was angry, and underneath the anger, something else she could not yet name. She was also aware that she was very tired, and that the seal was still glowing, and that the Alpha King had just overridden a political objection on her behalf, without announcing that he was doing so. She was not sure what to do with any of that. She folded her hands in her lap, and kept her face still, and waited. Her room in the court complex was on the east wing, 3rd level, modest by the standards of the building, which meant it was larger than any room she had slept in. There was a fire. There was a window with heavy drapes, and through them, when she stood close, she could see the courtyard below, lit by iron-fitted torches, cold blue moonlight, cutting down at an angle from the north, and warming to amber where it met the torch flame. She did not sleep. She sat at the desk with Breveth's summary notes. He had left her a copy, without being asked, which she suspected meant he was the kind of archivist who operated on the principle that information finds its correct level on its own, and she read through the Vestari lineage, with the same careful attention she had given to every document she had handled in the past decade. 300 years, or 276 to be precise, and she had learned to be precise. The Vestari family had served the court in an administrative capacity. Not political, not military, but the specific function of keepers of the court's oldest records. Compilers of the Bloodline register, the people who wrote the notations. She read that, and sat very still for a moment, with the specific sensation of something slotting into place that had been displaced for a long time. She had always been good with records. She had assumed it was because she had had to be. She was still reading when the knock came at her door. It was not the Alpha King. It was a guard with a message, written in a hand she had already learned to recognize. Brief, exact, 3 lines. "Your mother has been moved to the court physician's ward. Her care is being arranged. This is not a kindness. It is an administrative requirement, given what the records confirm. You will be informed of the outcome of the full verification in the morning." She read it 3 times. She thought about the last line. Not a kindness, an administrative requirement. And she thought about why a man who had issued a 3-word command in a council chamber had added that qualifier, and she did not come to any conclusions she could defend. But she did not stop thinking about it either. She folded the note and set it on top of the archivist's records, and went back to reading. Lady Aldrath moved quickly. Isabel learned this, not through any dramatic revelation, but through the texture of the 2 days that followed. The conversations that ended when she walked into rooms, the senior council assistant who had been assigned to her orientation, and who asked questions with the structure of someone who had been briefed on what to look for, the specific way the administrative verification process stalled on its 2nd day, when one of the 3 required archivists, was unavailable for reasons that were not provided. She noted all of this. She did not say anything about it to anyone. On the morning of the third day, she was in the lower archive. Breveth had given her access, with the quiet, matter-of-fact generosity of someone who understood that a person who could read old notation could verify their own record faster than the system could. When she found the suppression document, it had been filed under a secondary classification that she would not have known to look for if she had not already read the primary record 3 times and noticed that the bloodline markers ran in a register that was referenced but not reproduced. She was methodical about it. She pulled the secondary file, opened it at the long table under the archive's single high window, where the grey daylight came down clean and cold, and read it with the thoroughness of someone for whom thoroughness had always been the main available tool. The document was 70 years old. It was a court order. It authorized, in the administrative language of the period, the redaction of the Vestari family from the active bloodline register, on the grounds that the eldest heir had died without issue, and the line was effectively dissolved. There was a counter-signature at the bottom. The family name of the counter-signatory was Aldrath. Not Senna Aldrath. She would have been a child 70 years ago, or not yet born. But the family, the specific institutional family whose standing in this court was built, among other things, on its position as the keepers of the bloodline register after the Vestari had been removed from it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the file, replaced it exactly as she had found it, and requested a full copy under her provisional standing as a party to the verification process. The archive clerk hesitated. "I have provisional standing," she said. "It was granted by the Alpha King on the evening of my arrival. If you would like to verify it, I can wait." The clerk pulled the copy. She had not intended to go to Gawthron directly. She had intended to give the documents to Breveth and let the formal process handle it. She was in the corridor outside the archive, the file under her arm, working out the most efficient route to Breveth's office, when she turned a corner and found herself 4 steps from the Alpha King and his first steward, who appeared to have been walking in the opposite direction. He stopped. She stopped. The first steward looked between them with the practiced blankness of someone who had developed a talent for not being present. "You have something," Gawthron said. His eyes had gone to the file before she had said a word. "Yes. Breveth's office or mine?" It was, again, not quite a question. She thought about what it meant that he was offering a choice. "Yours," she said. "It will take longer to explain. Breveth will not need it explained." Something almost arrived in his expression. Not quite amusement, something adjacent to it. "Come then," he said. He read the suppression document the way she read documents, in full, without reaction, going back twice to specific paragraphs. The first steward had withdrawn. The council chamber fire was low, amber and steady, and the cold grey light from the high windows pressed against the warm glow from the hearth. She sat across the table and watched him read, and did not speak. When he finished, he set the document down. 70 years, he said. "Yes." And the Aldrath family took the register position, 3 months after the suppression order was filed. She had verified the timing before she had come. Their standing in this court, a significant portion of it, rests on that position. He was quiet. She had learned, in 3 days, something of the quality of his different silences. This one was the calculating kind. "Lady Aldrath will dispute the document's relevance," he said. "She will argue the suppression was procedurally valid, that the counter-signature represents legitimate institutional process, not conspiracy. I know. She will also argue that your bloodline claim, even if verified, does not automatically restore the register position to your family. That's correct? It doesn't. Then what do you want from this?" It was the first time he had asked her what she wanted, The directness of it was almost startling. She looked at him. "I want my mother's health secured. I want verification of the bloodline completed so that whatever standing my family is entitled to, she has it. And I want the suppression document on the record. Not acted upon necessarily, just on the record, visible. So it cannot be used again." He was looking at her with that quality of attention she had not entirely learned how to classify. Thorough, specific, the kind of attention that took something in and held it, rather than processing it immediately. "That's a very small set of demands," he said, "for someone holding a document that could restructure 2 centuries of institutional standing." "I'm aware of what I'm holding," she said. "I'm not interested in restructuring anything. I want my mother safe and the record accurate. That is all I've ever wanted." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up the document again and said quietly, as though to himself, he had no idea what he had purchased. "Coltrane has never known what he had," she said. She had not planned to say it, and the honesty of it surprised even her. The old exhaustion in it, the long years of managing a household and a reputation and a debt that was not hers, with someone who had never once thought to look at what she was carrying. He looked up from the document. She looked back at him. She was angry and grieving, and also, underneath both of those things, so tired of being in a situation she had not made. She kept all of it off her face, because she had been keeping things off her face since she was 12 years old. But she was also, for the first time in a long time, not entirely sure that he was not reading it anyway. The formal hearing was held 4 days later, in the main council chamber, before the Alpha King and 5 senior council witnesses. Lady Aldrath arrived in silk, the colour of ash, composed and correct, with 2 of her own archivists, and a counter-argument that had clearly been prepared with speed and precision. She disputed the Bloodline claim on technical grounds, the Bloodline seal's response on environmental grounds, and the suppression document's relevance on procedural grounds, and she did it with the careful, unhurried confidence of a woman who had been doing this for 30 years and had never, in that time, made the mistake of appearing threatened. Breveth presented the Bloodline record. The second archivist, found and restored to availability, presented the lineage verification, completed and signed. The suppression document was entered into the record. Countersignatures were verified against family rolls 3 generations back. Isabel spoke twice, once to confirm the facts as she understood them. Once at the end, when Lady Aldrath's second archivist suggested, with the specific tone of someone raising a point they had been briefed to raise, that the seal's response might have been staged. She said, "I have been in this court for 6 days. I arrived with a box I had never opened. I was not told what it contained, what it meant, or why it was in my care. I opened it when I was asked to." She looked at the council witnesses, not at Lady Aldrath. "I am not asking for a position or a title. I am asking for the record to be accurate. If the record is accurate, this council can make whatever decisions it makes. I will not be here to dispute them. I intend to go home." The chamber was quiet. Gawthron said, "The verification stands, the suppression document stands, the Bloodline register will be corrected." A pause. "Lady Aldrath's current position in this court is not contingent on the register. It will not be affected." Lady Aldrath was controlled, but Isabel had spent 6 days learning to read the quality of control in this court, and what she saw in Lady Aldrath's expression when Gawthron spoke was the specific look of a person who had just understood that the threat they had been managing was not the one they should have been watching. She had not, it seemed, considered the possibility that the Alpha King might separate the record from the politics. Isabel had. She was packing when he came to the East Wing. She heard the knock and recognized it. Deliberate, unhurried, and the recognition sat strangely in her chest. She had only heard it once before, at a different door. That felt like much longer ago than 11 days. She opened the door. He stood in the corridor the way he stood everywhere, fully, without leaning, taking up exactly the space he occupied, and no more. He had come without the first steward. The corridor was empty. "You're leaving," he said. "My mother is well enough to travel. Breveth has everything he needs. The process will complete without me." He was quiet. Not the calculating silence or the command silence. Something else. "Your provisional standing," he said, "can be converted to formal standing, as a Vestari heir. It would give you access to the archive, to certain council records, to—" "I know what it would give me," she said. And I have a house. I have a neighbor's daughter who has been sitting with my mother for 11 days and needs to go back to her own work. I have a physician's compound to renew and an administrative record to correct, because my stepfather has apparently made debts in 4 directions, and the house itself may be encumbered." She stopped. "I have a life. It was not a large one, but it was mine, and I would like to go back to it." He looked at her for a moment. "Coltrane Ashfeld's debts," he said, "will be cleared. The box was the collateral. The debt is satisfied." She had not expected that. She had been so occupied with the Bloodline record and her mother and the suppression document that she realized, stopped thinking about the debt itself. "That was the original purpose," she said. "Yes." "Then, thank you." He nodded. He did not move to leave. She looked at him and felt 2 things at the same time that did not fit together: relief, clean and specific, and something else that she was not going to examine here in a doorway, with her bag half packed and her mother waiting. She folded both of them flat. "The thing I said in the hearing," he said, "that your standing was not contingent on the register. Yes, I meant it in the other direction as well." He was choosing his words with the specific care of someone who did not often have to. "Your standing here is not contingent on the register. That is not why I—" He stopped. She waited. "The record should be accurate," he said finally. "It was not. It is now." A pause. "That is all." She understood this was not, in fact, all. She understood that he was a man who had said things to her in this building over 11 days that had cost him small amounts of something, and that each small amount had been deliberate, and that this was how he moved, in increments small enough to deny if he needed to. She was the same. She said, "If the formal standing is still available in 6 months, when I have dealt with the house and the records and all the rest of it, I will consider it." Something settled in him. She felt it rather than saw it. "It will be available," he said. She left the next morning at first light with her mother in a court cart. Not a grand vehicle, but solid and covered, with a brazier that kept the inside warm, and a driver who had been assigned without her asking, who seemed to consider the route back to the market district beneath comment. The box was not with her. The seal had been placed in the archive. Breveth had given her a receipt for it, with the kind of archival thoroughness that made her like him very much. Her mother held her hand for the first part of the journey, and did not ask questions. This was a quality her mother had always had, the specific restraint of someone who understood that some information arrived in its own time. She had hair that had once been the same dark brown as Isabel's, gone grey at the temples now, and pale grey eyes that were the origin of Isabel's own, and she looked at her daughter in the amber light of the brazier, with the quiet expression of a woman who had made certain decisions for reasons she had never fully explained. "You opened the box," she said, about halfway back. "Yes." Her mother nodded, as though this had been expected, as if she had always known that eventually the box would be opened, and that when it was, it would be Isabel's hands on the clasp. "Your grandmother told me," she said, "when I was very young, that our family had once been keepers of something important. She did not say what. I think she was not sure anyone would believe her." Isabel thought about 276 years, about the notation on her wrist, about a man who had ridden to collect a debt personally and stayed to watch her open a seal that had not responded to anyone in her family's lifetime. She was right, Isabel said. Her mother squeezed her hand once and let go. The house was exactly as she had left it. The neighbour's daughter had kept it in good order, which Isabel paid for properly and with thanks. The physician's compound was renewed. The administrative records took 3 weeks. Coltrane's debts were, as she had feared, in 4 directions. But the Alpha King's notice of satisfaction had arrived before she had, in a sealed document on official court parchment, that the creditors read with the specific attention of people reassessing a situation, and by the end of the 3rd week only 1 debt remained open, and that one she settled from her own savings, because it was owed to a widow, and the amount was not large. She spent a month in the house. She repaired 2 things that had been wrong for years. She repaired a 3rd thing that had been wrong for longer. She slept in her own room and ate her own food, and sat at the writing desk, where the iron box had not sat for the first time in 4 years, and found that the absence of it made the room feel larger. She received 2 letters from Breveth. Both were about archival matters, a gap in the Vestari record that he was cross-referencing, a notation system he had found in a secondary catalogue that appeared to be Vestari in origin. She wrote back with care, and at length, because she had opinions about notation systems and the specific pleasure of finding someone else who did not think that was peculiar. She received 1 letter that was not from Breveth. It had no return marking, but the hand was deliberate and brief. 3 lines of administrative language about the formal standing offer and its continued availability, and at the end, in the same hand. The archivist tells me you write well. I have no opinion about notation systems, but I have read the 2 replies you sent him. He left them on the council room table, which I suspect was not accidental. She read it twice. She sat with it at the desk in the hall where everything had begun. 11 days that felt like a different life, and also the beginning of this one. She did not write back immediately. She considered what she wanted to say for 3 days, the same careful way she always thought, through what she wanted, quietly, in the time available. Then she wrote, "I will be available in 3 months. The house is nearly in order. I expect the formal standing to be as advertised. I would also like to discuss what is to be done with the suppression document's implications over the long term. This seems like the kind of problem that requires someone who understands both the record and the room, and I have come to believe I understand both." She sent it. She went back to the desk and opened Breveth's 2nd letter and spent the evening reading about notation systems. The seal, in the archive 3 hours ride away, sat in its cloth on its shelf. Whether it continued to glow, she did not know. She suspected it did. Some things, once recognized, do not go back to waiting. What would you have done if you were Isabel? Would you have stayed in the court when you had the chance, or gone home to put things right first? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.